Dignity isn't lost in a single moment. It's stripped away by those who pretend they never had to earn it. Sometimes it takes one person's disgrace to expose everyone else's character. Let us know in the comments section below, what would you do if you saw someone disrespected like this? Brittany Delphine knew how to go unnoticed. She had mastered it over the years, not out of fear, but from the practiced grace of someone who had seen too much to need anyone's spotlight. Her bones ached a little more than they used to, and her hands shook when she tried to button her coat too fast. But that never stopped her. Not when she still had neighbors who relied on her for their medicine pickups, while not when she still felt the duty that never quite left her, after Vietnam. Every morning she rose at 5:30 sharp. She didn't have anywhere to be, necessarily, but the rhythm of habit kept her grounded. Coffee, toast, the crossword from the back page of the local paper, then a slow walk through her small backyard, where she checked the wilted lavender she'd been coaxing back to life since last spring. Her house was humble, but it stood because she kept it standing. The roof had a leak she couldn't afford to fix, so she placed a pot under it when it rained and just moved on. Brittany's pension barely covered her utilities, but she managed. She always had. Today she needed just a few things from the store: eggs, oatmeal, the small jug of milk, and the arthritis cream her neighbor, Mrs. Kelly, couldn't leave the house to get. Brittany smiled when she wrote that name down. 79 years old and still watching her grandkids on weekends, Mrs. Kelly had grit, but her joints had given up the fight. Brittany was used to filling in gaps like that. She didn't think of it as kindness, as continuity. She tucked her military ID into the worn wallet she kept pressed flat inside a faded purse. No one ever asked her for it anymore, but it felt like armor. The grocery store on Montclair Avenue had changed over the years. Where once there were clerks who knew her by name, now there were scowling teenagers behind touchscreens. The fluorescent lights felt harsher than before. The aisles, once arranged neatly, now shifted with every week, chasing profit margins instead of people. But Brittany still came. It was close, and she didn't drive much anymore. Her steps were measured. No cane yet, though her knees had been voting otherwise lately. She kept a soft grip on her wire shopping cart as she made her way inside. The list in her hand trembled slightly, and she cursed it under her breath, not because she was ashamed of the shake, but because she hated that her strength now came in smaller portions. The eggs came first, then the oatmeal, then the cream. Last, she reached for the milk, her fingers wrapping around the cool handle as a kid sprinted past her and nearly knocked it from her hands. She didn't say anything, just steadied herself, just moved on. The line at the register was long and loud. A toddler screamed as her mother tried to dig for coupons. Two teens in hoodies argued about who owed who $5. Brittany waited, watching the digital numbers change on the screen in front of her, watching the cashier work with the robotic detachment of someone who wished they were anywhere else. When it was finally her turn, she placed the items down, one at a time. She was careful, almost reverent. The eggs, the cream, the oatmeal, the milk. The cashier, a thin young man with a scruffy jawline and earbuds in one ear, barely looked up. "That'll be $13.79, he muttered. Brittany opened her wallet, counted out her bills, then her coins. She set them down, sorting the quarters first, then the dimes. He sighed. "Hold on," she said softly. "I think I've got another quarter." The boy's fingers drummed the register. She found it. But when he counted the money again, he scowled. "You're short," he said. She blinked. "How much?" 50 cents. "Oh?" Brittany dug deeper. She knew she didn't have it. She'd counted it twice before she came. But hope had made her reach again. "Sorry," she said. "I can put the milk back." The boy rolled his eyes. "You could have done that before I rang it up," he snapped. Then, louder, "People gotta learn to come prepared. I'm not wasting time for 50 cents. A few heads turned. Brittany's cheeks flushed. Her voice caught. "I didn't mean to—" "Just take your stuff and go," he muttered. yanking the milk away and tossing it into the basket behind him. She watched it land hard against another item. It had been years since Brittany had felt embarrassed like this. Years since someone spoke to her like she was nothing but a burden. She tried to smile, to thank him, to hold on to grace. But just as she reached for the bag, a hand shoved her gently from behind. Barely a push, but enough to catch her off balance. She stumbled forward, her palm catching the counter. No one moved to help. Not the mother with the toddler, not the kids in hoodies, not the cashier, who was already scanning the next customer's items like she didn't exist. And for the first time in a long time, Brittany Delphine stood alone, bracing herself against the cold indifference of a world that had forgotten who she was. She didn't know yet that silence was about to break. And when it did, it wouldn't be loud. It would come in boots, in shadow, in wordless solidarity. But for now, she just steadied herself and turned to leave. Brittany didn't say a word as she shuffled toward the exit, her single grocery bag swinging lightly from her fingers, the eggs pressing awkwardly into the plastic. She could feel the stares, some curious, most indifferent. No one rushed after her, no one asked if she was all right. The push hadn't hurt her physically, not really, but something deeper had cracked inside her, something that had taken decades to build. The automatic doors opened with a hiss, as if sighing in relief to see her gone. She stepped outside and blinked under the unforgiving sunlight. The bag felt heavier now. Her shoulders slumped a little more than usual. She didn't notice the pair of teenage boys snickering near the vending machine. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care anymore. She made it halfway down the sidewalk before her legs hesitated. She needed a moment to catch her breath, or maybe just her dignity. Brittany lowered herself slowly onto the bench near the cart return. The ache in her knees was matched only by the throb in her chest. She stared down at her wrinkled hands, still trembling slightly, the veins beneath her skin telling stories no one wanted to hear. She remembered suturing wounds by flashlight in the jungle, the air thick with blood and gunpowder. She remembered carrying a wounded corporal across a rice field under enemy fire. She remembered faces, young, scared, hopeful. Many of them didn't come back. But she had. She came back and served again and again, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Now she could even buy milk. Her eyes welled, but she refused to let the tears fall. She blinked them back with the same quiet discipline that had kept her alive through war, grief, and years of watching friends pass one by one. A car pulled into the parking spot across from her. She barely glanced at it. Then another one arrived, parked directly beside the first. Then a third. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. Brittany noticed the sudden shift in air first, the way sound seemed to bend around the lot like everything paused. Car doors opened in unison. She looked up. 5 figures emerged, tall, clean-cut, each in jeans, boots, and fitted T-shirts that couldn't hide the discipline and how they stood, or the years of training that still lived in their spines. One of them carried something in his hand, small, square, wrapped in cloth. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They moved together, not fast, not aggressive, but with purpose, the kind of movement that came from muscle memory, from knowing how to enter a room when seconds mattered and lives depended on it. They surrounded her. One stepped in front. The others flanked behind and to her sides, forming a silent perimeter like a living wall. Their eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on her. Brittany blinked, her hand frozen on the strap of her bag. "Can I help you?" The man in front nodded once, slow and measured. His voice was calm, low, steady. "Ma'am, you're Brittany Delphine, Army Nurse Corps, 5th Evac, Vietnam, right?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she answered, cautious. "That was a long time ago." He offered the faintest smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes but came from somewhere real. "My name's Nathan Brooks, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired." That name tugged at something. He saw the confusion forming in her gaze and gently unwrapped the cloth he held. Inside was a photograph. 2 rows of wounded Marines, cots lined up in a humid, dim-lit tent. A young man, barely more than a boy, with a blood-soaked bandage across his chest, staring at the camera with wide, stunned eyes. "You saved my life in 1972, he said. "You didn't remember me, but I never forgot you." Her mouth opened, closed. She stared at the photo, her mind racing. It had been so many years, so many faces. "I was bleeding out. You talked to me while you worked, told me about your dog, Boomer, said you missed him more than air conditioning." Her lip quivered and she pressed her hand over her heart, laughter caught in sorrow. "You were just a kid." Nathan nodded. "And now I'm not. But I'm alive, because of you." The other Marines remained silent but respectful. The youngest, a private first class with warm eyes, stepped forward and held out a paper bag. "We covered your groceries, ma'am," he said, "including the milk." Brittany blinked. "Why?" Nathan answered for all of them. "Because respect shouldn't be optional. Because no one treats a woman like you the way he did in there. Because some of us still remember who built the ground we walk on." He turned slightly, making sure she saw the cashier now standing frozen just inside the glass doors, the store manager approaching him with confusion in his eyes. The teen's bravado had drained, replaced with something approaching dread. One of the other Marines pulled out a phone. "I didn't film the shove," he said quietly, "but we got the aftermath. That's going up tonight. No one does that to a veteran, not on our watch." Brittany felt her knees buckle, but this time from something different. Not pain. Relief. She took the bag, her fingers brushing the paper. The milk, the eggs, the cream, all intact. But more than that, there was something else inside. A velvet box. Her hand hovered. "What's this?" Nathan stepped back. "We spoke with the local VFW. They told us you never formally received one of these. You earned it." She opened the box. "Purple Heart." Her breath hitched. "I didn't think anyone remembered," she whispered. Nathan shook his head. "We do." The wind stirred her hair. The sky, for once, softened. Brittany Delphine, surrounded by 5 Marines who spoke not in speeches but in action, stood a little taller. And for the first time in decades, she didn't feel invisible. By the time Brittany reached home, the sun had dropped low over the rooftops, casting a warm amber glow on the porch steps she'd repainted 3 summers ago with leftover marine-grade paint. She sat on the swing that creaked just enough to remind her it was still alive, the paper grocery bag resting beside her, the Purple Heart still unopened in its velvet case. She hadn't yet found the words to describe the day's turn, a push, a humiliation, followed by an intervention so unexpected it seemed like a story someone else might have told. Her fingers brushed the soft corner of the metals box. She hadn't been thinking about recognition when she signed up. Hell, back then half the world barely thought women belonged in the military at all. She'd gone anyway, and when the men bled and screamed and begged for their mothers, it had never mattered who wore what rank or who had what chromosomes. She was there, holding their hands, closing wounds, singing old country songs off-key until the morphine kicked in. But even then, no one ever handed her medals. She didn't ask for them either. The screen door creaked open behind her. "You didn't say you were stopping at the store," called Mrs. Kelly, wrapped in her pink robe, leaning on her walker. "I thought you were going to take a rest today." Brittany looked back and gave a tired smile. "Didn't plan for it to be eventful." Mrs. Kelly hobbled down a step. "You all right?" Brittany hesitated. Then, "I got shoved." "Excuse me?" "In the store. Over 50 cents. A kid didn't want to wait while I counted." Mrs. Kelly's lips thinned. "You get his name?" "No need." Brittany stood slowly and lifted the bag. 5 Marines took care of it." That stopped Mrs. Kelly cold. "What do you mean, took care of it?" "They saw. One of them. He was someone I treated back in Nam." Brittany handed her the cream. They paid. They stood up for me. Said I never got my Purple Heart and gave me this. She opened the velvet box. The soft glow of the metal caught the last of the sunlight. Mrs. Kelly's eyes welled instantly. "Oh, Brittany!" He felt like justice, but quieter, like the world paused just long enough to remember. The next morning, the video went viral. It wasn't flashy, no yelling, no violence. Just 5 men standing still as statues, surrounding a woman whose name no one recognized at first. But the internet caught the details. The military bearing, the way Brittany's hand trembled, not from fear but from surprise. The shot of the Purple Heart being presented with care, reverence, truth. Local news picked it up by noon, national by the evening. "Rockery Store Heroes Honor Elderly Veteran," the headline read. Subheaders followed. "Marine Saved by Nurse Returns the Favor." "Forgotten Vet Receives Long Overdue Medal." Calls began pouring in. The grocery chain issued a swift apology, and the regional manager arrived in person at Brittany's door with flowers and a statement that she would never need to pay for groceries again in their stores. "I'm not looking for handouts," she told him politely, her back straight. "I understand," he replied, handing her a laminated card. "Just know this is thanks, not pity." The boy who had shoved her, Troy Jenkins, was placed on unpaid leave while the company investigated. Brittany didn't ask for his firing, but the story had spread far enough that the message had already landed. Meanwhile, the Veterans Affairs Office she'd once petitioned for proper medal documentation reached out to formally acknowledge their mistake. "We owe you more than a medal, Ms. Delphine," the woman said over the phone. "We owe you history corrected." And suddenly Brittany found herself invited to speak at high schools, local veteran events, even the base hospital downstate. She wore the same blazer to everyone, simple navy, 2 buttons, the Purple Heart pinned carefully to the left. She never prepared speeches. She didn't need to. She told stories instead, about bandages, about boys from Alabama and Queens and Bakersfield who had no idea how to pronounce Da Nang until they bled there. She talked about how the hardest part wasn't the blood, but the silence that followed when you came home and no one asked you what you saw. But the story that gripped people most wasn't from a battlefield. It was from a grocery store, a place every American could picture, a place where dignity had been lost and then, astonishingly, returned. Weeks later, a letter arrived. It was from Nathan Brooks, handwritten. No grand declarations, just gratitude. "Ma'am, I spent years trying to forget the war, but your voice was the last thing I heard before I passed out in that field. I never knew your name. I never knew what became of you. And when I saw what happened in that store, I felt ashamed that I hadn't found you sooner, that we let a hero stand alone. You didn't need us to save you, but we needed to remember what it meant to serve." She kept that letter in her kitchen drawer. Sometimes she read it when the nights felt longer, and sometimes she didn't need to, because every so often someone new would knock on her door, a neighbor, a veteran, a curious teenager, and they'd say some version of the same thing. "I saw what happened. I just wanted to say thank you." Brittany Delphine didn't need applause. She had stood in jungles that swallowed whole squads, in wards that reeked of morphine and gunpowder. She had mopped up lives with her bare hands. But now, in her quiet house on a quiet street, she felt something she hadn't felt in decades. And somewhere in the world, 5 Marines still carried her name like a banner, wordlessly reminding others that service doesn't end when the war does. Sometimes it begins again with a shove. Autumn came early that year. The mornings held a crispness that made Brittany's breath visible as she stood on the community center's wooden stage, gripping the sides of the podium a little tighter than she needed to, not out of fear, but to ground herself, because even after everything that had unfolded in the weeks since that day at the grocery store, she still couldn't quite believe people were showing up to hear from her. Rows of folding chairs stretched out in front of her, every one of them filled. Veterans in uniform, teenagers with notebooks, parents holding toddlers on their laps, her neighbors, the mayor, a delegation from the VA, and off to the right, standing quietly with their hands clasped behind their backs like it was second nature, stood the 5 Marines. They hadn't asked for attention either, but they came anyway. Brittany looked down at the speech someone had typed up for her. Words she hadn't written, words that didn't quite fit her. She turned the page over, folded it in half, and tucked it into the inner pocket of her blazer. "I was told," she began, voice soft but sure, "that I'm supposed to talk about service, about sacrifice, about patriotism." She paused. "But I think you already know about those things. You wouldn't be here if you didn't." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. No applause, just listening. "Oh, instead, I want to talk about something smaller, something quieter. Dignity." He exhaled slowly. "Not the kind that comes from medals or ceremonies, the kind you carry in your bones, the kind you cling to when everything else is stripped away, the kind they tried to take from me in that store." She met the eyes of a girl in the second row, maybe 14, leaning forward with a kind of hunger for meaning Brittany remembered well. When you're young, you think the fight's out there somewhere, in the trenches, on the front lines, but sometimes it's in line at the checkout. Sometimes it's when someone looks at you like you don't belong in your own story anymore. A breeze stirred through the open doors of the community center. She glanced at the Marines, then back to the audience. But the fight isn't always about pushing back. Sometimes it's about standing still, holding your ground, letting the world see you, even if they look away first. She paused again, then smiled faintly. And sometimes, if you're lucky, 5 people you've never met, or don't remember meeting, stand with you. And suddenly, you're not invisible anymore. The room held its breath with her. "This day changed my life, not because I got attention, but because it reminded me that we're still capable of recognizing each other's worth, of seeing the invisible and saying, 'No more.'" Brittany stepped back. No grand finale, no dramatics, just truth. The silence that followed was not empty. It was sacred. Then, slowly, applause swelled. Not clapping for noise, but for meaning. For the message. For her. Afterward, people lined up to speak to her, some with tears in their eyes, others with stories of their own. A woman who had served in Desert Storm and hadn't spoken of it in 20 years. A teenager whose grandfather never told anyone about Korea until he saw Brittany's clip. A grocery store employee from the next town over who'd started a policy of personally assisting any elderly veteran who came through their checkout lane. Brittany didn't have answers for them all, but she listened, she hugged, she held their hands. And when the crowd began to thin, she walked over to the Marines. "You boys didn't have to come today," she said, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "We wouldn't have missed it," Nathan replied. "You saved me once. You saved a lot of people that day. Now it's your turn to feel what it's like to be lifted up." She chuckled. "I'm not used to being lifted. Usually I'm the one holding everyone else together." Amanda Blake stepped forward, holding out a small journal. "We've been collecting letters from people your story touched. We thought you should have them." Brittany took the journal. The first page was signed in a loopy teenage scrawl. "You made me want to become a nurse in the Army. Thank you for showing me what strength really is." Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the cover. "You 5. You didn't just help me stand tall. You made the world stand still for a moment. You made it listen." Darius Monroe spoke for the first time. "We just reminded people. You did the rest." That night, Brittany sat on her porch again, the medal still pinned to her blazer, the journal beside her, and a glass of sweet tea in her hand. The swing creaked, just like always. But this time, something in the air had shifted. Not just for her, but for the town. Someone had started repainting the war memorial near the city park. A high school civics teacher added a unit about female veterans to his curriculum. A local chain restaurant began offering permanent discounts to service members and posted Brittany's photo at the front entrance with the caption, "We honor those who serve with courage, dignity, and heart." She didn't ask for any of it, but she accepted it because dignity, once lost and reclaimed, becomes something stronger than pride. It becomes legacy. As she sipped her tea, a group of kids rode their bikes past her gate. One of them waved. "Hi, Miss Brittany." She smiled and waved back. "Stay safe out there." The boy nodded, pedaling harder. "Thank you for your service." She leaned back, letting the sound of his voice settle into her bones like sunlight. The world had changed, not all at once, but enough. And for the first time in a long time, Brittany Delphine knew the war was truly over. Not just the one she'd fought overseas, but the quiet one she'd been fighting ever since. She hadn't just survived, she had been seen, and that made all the difference.